The key probably to the Oxford performance will be how their young guys perform. Charlie Humphreys, James Roycroft, Ed Coode, Andrew Lindsay, all old Etonians and old Hampton schoolboys, junior internationals who may go on to be our Olympians of the future. Now,
the biggest possible combination. They've put the two Germans, who are both former world champions in this event, in the stern, and I think we'll have to watch carefully Mark Webber, who's a very controlled, composed stroke, with the great power, the biggest man in the race, Stefan Forster, behind him at 7. And a key man too, I think, Alex Story, the British international.
Attention! Go!
And away we go. Oxford, the nearer camera on the Middlesex station, and they're off to a bit of a flyer.
yeah, as I said, I think Oxford are quick in the first 30 seconds or so. My club crew raced against both these two. Cambridge then at about 45 seconds really moved fast. It'll be interesting to see if they have that same change of pace today.
This shot is from a new camera we're offering you from a catamaran, which is going alongside the boat, so you can see what the advantage is. Very slight to Oxford.
Very, very slight. And it's interesting that there obviously wasn't very much off the boats. The pundits were a bit divided on this, but certainly the two have got off more or less stroke for stroke. There's nothing between them as they race down the first minute or so.
I think as the crews have just settled down, they settle down now into a sort of race pace that they'll aim to go for the next 4 or 5 minutes now. Looks like possibly Cambridge a little bit quicker. I'm not sure, it's hard to work with the television angle, but I think Cambridge may be a fraction ahead.
Well, so far, Alex Greeny found the water that he wanted rather quicker than his colleague in the ISIS boat. Long way to go yet. As we look at them from above, and it does seem that Cambridge do have the slight advantage, but Alex Greeny will want to hold them out as far as he can at the end of Fulham Reach. First shouts from the umpire.
Indeed, and I think he'll be trying to keep them apart at this point, because they're moving towards the first bend. You can see there's already some disturbance from the blades coming close together. They've responded there. They've moved apart. They're now a safe distance apart, but there's only perhaps an inch or two to Oxford at the moment. It's very little, perhaps an odd foot.
Now this is a point where Oxford have got to dig in. They should be all right to hold their line to the bend. Alex Greeny will try to hold on as long as he can in a straight line.
Cambridge are being warned. They're wanting to turn, and Alex Greeny won't let them. We're having another good contest as last year. The blades are very close.
And certainly in practice, the Cambridge Cox has shown a proclivity for cutting this bend. It's certainly the way he wants to go, is to push wide towards Middlesex. But they've just pulled apart a bit again. Safety again for a few minutes.
At the rehearsal in launches, Alistair Potts was on the other station, and people were really surprised how he cut the bend so sharply.
Yeah, you can see how the water's really chopping up there. That was a little bit I don't know if it's a launch wash or something like that. That'll throw the crews off a little bit. Oxford seem to be coming slightly better out of the clashing there. Very important at this point to keep an eye on your oar. You'll see the people looking around at their oars.
Oh, they're in serious trouble now. There is a real danger here. This is definitely a foul. There's contact between the boats. Unless they get apart here, we could really see something most serious. That could be a disqualification. But they have pulled apart. The question is who's taken advantage of this. And they're still coming back towards one another. There's absolutely no give being given here. Oxford determined to hold their line, but Cambridge are coming back in again.
I think the umpire just wanted Oxford there. He's saying that he's happy with them where they are at the moment.
Cambridge!
And it's a repeat of last year in terms of the amount of noise we're hearing from the umpire. But Alex Greeny coaxing it in a rather different fashion. The aggression is there this time from him. Last year it was said he was under instructions for a clean race. Flick of the rudder would certainly have brought a disqualification at the right moment. Not an easy day for the most experienced umpire.
Now this is a crucial bit of the race here. We're 3 or 4 minutes into it. This is a point where we'll have to see whether Oxford have really had to burn to stay in contact, or whether the two crews are equally composed and equally relaxed.
And Cambridge have seized perhaps the initiative. They've got a third of a length. They've managed to hold off the first bend. The first bend's worth between a third and a half a length, so Cambridge have gone about 3/4 of a length faster perhaps, or certainly half to 3/4. The question is what this took out of them, as Jonny said. They've now got about 2 minutes of straight rowing before they have to think about the next bend, which will be very much to Cambridge's favour as they come towards Hammersmith.
Now, just think if you look technically here, you can just see the Oxford blades are just holding up in the air before they go into the water. Cambridge is just going in that little bit quicker. And the Oxford blades miss a little bit of water, so they can't pull on that bit of water, and you can then see the effect on the boat speeds there. Cambridge are moving just a fraction quicker, I think, at the moment.
Well, the umpire decides where the stream is, and he's just a little closer over to the Cambridge boat. Oxford being forced a little wider than they would want to go, a little wider towards the Middlesex station.
And Cambridge have settled very low. They're at 34.5 strokes a minute, which is certainly very comfortable for them. They're capable of going a lot further at that rate. And they've got half a length. I think we might see something from them very soon as they come up towards Hammersmith. They're going to want to get more than that. But it's stroke for stroke rate-wise.
Well, during their years of success, Cambridge, this is where they've gone away, between Harrods Wharf and Hammersmith Bridge. Although last year, of course, they were on the Middlesex station, had to come around the outside, but the previous years, they were where they wanted to be.
This is a sort of period of any race which is absolutely crucial. 2/3 of a length behind another boat. It's the kind of point where the longer this position goes on, the weaker the crew in front feel. So it's absolutely vital for Cambridge here, if they are to win, that they push on and they push clear.
Cambridge!
And this is where Oxford are going to try and hold on to them as they come towards that bend. And we've had the times from the milepost. 3:33, that's 2 seconds outside the record. Fast conditions.
That's Hammersmith Bridge. And you can see how the bend now works in the favour of the light blue crew. Cambridge on the Surrey station, but Oxford hanging on and hanging on well. The roles now reversed from last year, where it was Cambridge who were hanging on. Weber setting a nice, comfortable rhythm.
This is where Oxford must dig in. They're going to throw everything they can in to hold Cambridge round this bend, because if Cambridge get round this bend, they'll begin to wash Oxford off. And once they're in the puddles, they'll go from 3/4 of a length up to a length and a half like that. It will take no time.
And certainly Cambridge put in a push there. They raised their rate of striking. That's the number of strokes a minute from 34 to 36. And Oxford responded, trying to hold on to them. But this is the crucial part of this bend, because within a minute it's going to start to flatten out. So Cambridge will want to be taking advantage now if they can. And they seem to be moving on a bit at this point. They've got nearly the length.
This is where the weight and the long levers comes very much into being.
You can see that shot there. Oxford have just lifted their rating a bit. They're throwing everything in now.
6:20 the time for Cambridge at Hammersmith Bridge. Let's get a Cox's view of how they're doing. Let's join Gary Herbert.
Yeah, it's looking an absolutely brilliant race here. I'm just watching Alex Greeny, and he's urging his men on. They've just got clear water now, Cambridge. So Alex has got to keep on top of them and keep pushing. But Alistair Potts there now. He's moved his men around. They've taken a fine advantage of this big Hammersmith bend. I haven't been too impressed with the way that Cambridge have been looking. Now they're just starting to settle down, and the two Germans are just going to move away, I can imagine.
And the official times for Hammersmith Bridge was 6:20, which is a new record, beating the 1993 time of another Cambridge crew, Oxford, at 6:23. This is on for a record all the way, and there is now water between the two crews, and they're almost line astern.
This is quite interesting, because usually what happens is when the crew in front get to this point of length up, they move straight out to about 2 lengths, and the race is effectively over. But in this situation, it maybe cost Cambridge a lot to get that clear water. And as I said, the longer the race goes on, the more it comes back into Oxford's favour, because if they can be in contact when they get near the Middlesex bend, Cambridge will have to move back to their station.
Certainly Alistair Potts is trying to get as far ahead as he can. Cambridge have moved up to nearly 37 strokes a minute. They're trying to get clear of them. They're trying to throw the water from their puddles down on top of Oxford to make it more uncomfortable for them, steal their station, steal their water, so they can get as far away from them and discourage them from coming back on terms as they come towards the end of Chiswick Ayr.
Just to reiterate the point of the puddles, you can see the boat there going through the puddles formed by the bow side of the Cambridge boat. So very choppy for them.
It begins the boat begin to get very unstable if there's those big puddles coming underneath, and if it's unstable, you begin to tense up, and obviously when the tension comes in, the rhythm can disappear there.
Determination, the grit of the teeth of Alex Story, who's had so much of a problem with his back. Brad Crombie with the very short haircut he gave himself this week.
Certainly, Oxford managed to hold on a bit there. Cambridge made a big push and got away a bit, and I think Oxford have crept back a bit towards them. There's probably nearly 2/3, 3/4 of a length of daylight between the boats, though. And Cambridge have actually moved over more onto the Middlesex side. They've actually stolen Oxford's water. They will, of course, have to give way if Oxford come back on terms.
They're coming up towards Chiswick Steps, which is at 2 miles and 1,020 yards. Must say I'm impressed with Graham Smith, the bowman. Looks very, very composed and neat in what he's doing there. Would you agree, Chris?
Absolutely. They're of course, immensely experienced people. You know, Graham has been representing his country since he was 15. He was one of our star junior internationals. He won medals, 2 golds and silver in consecutive years. But I must say, Cambridge so far have shown composure and rode the Surrey Bend exactly as they should. But now we're coming back onto the final end of the Surrey Bend, and then things move more to Oxford's favour, and they're still there. They're not that far back.
They have, as we've seen, Oxford, they have looked quite relaxed. It may be that if Cambridge have put in too much to get clear and to hang on, but as this final bend comes, Oxford may be able to respond.
Paul Berger looks as though he's suffering a little bit there for me, the man in the 7th seat for Oxford.
Yes, certainly, I suppose I would rather be in the Cambridge boat at this point.
It's looking very good for Mark Faber's crew to square the tally in this competition for the Beefeater Gin Trophy.
Looking at this shot, it's very interesting to see how Cambridge are really drawing the blade right through. I think this is one of the differences between these two crews. They're very strong in that last part of the stroke, sending the boat away. You can see the rhythm being driven off the finish. It's looking very solid at this point. I think they're well on top of their work. They're hurting because they've been rowing extremely hard for over 10 minutes now. They're right on the edge here. This is the difficulty of rowing. If you put in too many big efforts, it can just take you right over the top. But this is very long. This is very strong rowing.
It's a hard time for being in the Cambridge boat because you know you can only lose it from here, but really, it's not that likely.
Comparison is worth looking at with Oxford, who do certainly look very laboured. It's becoming very hard work for Nick Robinson. Cambridge 9:56, which the record stands at 10:12. We could have the fastest race of all time here. Oxford at 10:01. That's the time at Chiswick Steps.
So I think Cambridge are really beginning to live up to their potential. They haven't really put a foot wrong. There were clearly some very anxious moments in the first mile or so. But this is a crew, remember, which is nearly 6'5.5" tall average. And they're making it look easy. They always say if you can't make it easy, you can't do it at all. And they're certainly doing it here.
It is a beautiful rhythm that we've become used to seeing from Robin Williams' crews with the assistance of Harry Mann. Although, of course, it was Sean Bowden with John Wilson who started the Cambridge success. Sean Bowden now the coach of Oxford, who looks as though he's going to start his contract there with a defeat. That's the Barnes Railway Bridge. As we're coming past, we've just passed the bandstand. They turn. The advantage of station has become irrelevant because Cambridge are in total control of the race.
And Cambridge actually have dropped the rate right down now. They're down to about 32, which means perhaps they're not looking straight to the record, but they're still keeping the power on. You can see that. And there, by comparison, is Oxford. Just see how much less power there is on those blades as they go in. They gave everything to get on terms on that bend. And they won the toss, took the gamble, but I don't think they've got enough left looking at them.
No, I don't think that even the greatest supporter of Oxford would see any comeback from here.
I'm trying to, but yeah, I think even when you see those shots from behind, you can see the faces and the power and the connection. If that kind of power is connected to the boat, it obviously makes the boat go faster. Oxford just don't have that power at this point. Now, that may well be because they just shot their bolt early on.
Got the flotilla of boats following the University boat race, which is still on course for being a record 16:45 set by Oxford in 1984 is the record. It's that same crew who held the record at Barnes Bridge. We'll get the times for that in a moment.
I think with the 15 seconds ahead at the last mark, I think they've got every chance of beating the record. That's a big margin to be ahead of the record, particularly on a still day like today. so much of the record is dependent on how the tide is. There's obviously a big tide flowing in today.
And both crews way ahead of the record at Barnesbridge. 13:32 for Cambridge, 13:38 for Oxford. The record set in 1984, 13:57.
Looks as if they're going to take a big lump out of this record. And this crew's still rowing very long and very strong. They're really showing their potential. It's really come right for Cambridge. The last 2 years they've shown this. In the last 2 or 3 days before the race, they've come up to perfection. And I think Robin Williams is to be commended. He's done it yet again by the look of things. Just look how consistent it is. All year they spend what amounts to 1 hour training for each stroke of this race, just to get it perfect on the day.
Yeah, and they're certainly not easing off there, are they? Maybe they're aware that they're getting close to the record, but they're certainly they're sticking it in.
They're certainly a sort of solid 34. They had a bit of a rest just before Barnesbridge, I think. But I think they're beginning to wind it up now. It's beginning to go up. You can see the rate lifting as they start to quicken. They smell the finish.
You have to be a man who's won this race several times, 4 times, to make a comment like that, having a bit of a rest. All things are relative in life. Cambridge coming around the final bend, coming towards the finish. They will smell the Mortlake Brewery now. That's Chiswick Bridge in the distance. And the new finish post just caught a slight glance of on the right. And it's certainly going to be a new record, and very comfortably too. 16:45 the time to beat, and Cambridge are destroying that previous time. And the fact that it was set by Oxford will be all that bit sweeter for them. Here they come, the last few strokes of a hugely impressive row, and they have won the boat race for the 6th consecutive time, and that matches their best sequence since the war. And Robin Williams will have been proved in his point that his crew is potentially the best that he'd had. Oxford beaten by a tremendously powerful crew who've certainly given their all here, to judge from Bull and Crombie, and so have they. It is an awful thing. They all know from the start that winning is everything, but only the losers really know how that feels. 16:19 for Cambridge, I beg your pardon. Thought that didn't sound too right. Oxford 16:28, so both well inside the previous record.
I'm sure Cambridge are just pleased to have won. The record will come later, but they didn't really put a foot wrong at all today. They rowed immaculately, they withstood the pressure, and they just did the job they were out there to do. It was very solid. The surprise actually was the Goldie Isis race, was perhaps, but for Cambridge it was a very, very satisfactory day.